Welcome to today's episode. We have a fantastic guest with us today, Faris, the founder and CEO of Shiageto Consulting. Faris is a thought leader in the world of emotional intelligence and leadership consulting. His passion lies in bringing more emotional intelligence, or EQ, into teams, companies, and products to truly drive success. Before starting Shiageto, Faris was a partner at a leading strategy firm where he gained extensive experience in shaping high-impact strategies for businesses. However, it was during his time as a strategy consultant that he realized something crucial. While many companies overemphasize IQ, they often overlook the equally important aspects of EQ and FQ, or focus quotient. Without these, even the smartest strategies can fail to take flight. Today, we're excited to dive deep into Faris's approach to success based on these three key pillars: IQ, EQ, and FQ. Faris, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Shav, and what an intro. I mean, I loved it. I think I might just leave after that.
We've got to hear more from you. The first thing I actually wanted to ask was a bit more about your history. So the actual moment when you recognized how crucial EQ actually was, and when you realized that this was a skill that you actually had yourself.
I guess informally, I first recognized it as a kid, right? As a teenager, as a sort of what's the right phrase? A teenager who was out of place, as many of us are. We all sort of grappling with our teenage years. For me, being a teenager was being massively overweight, having these industrial braces, being a second culture kid, so desperate to fit in. And I realized I was really good at finding my way to fit in. And, in hindsight, that was EQ. It was going, hey, how do I bond with this group of people, right? Maybe it's tell some jokes. Maybe it's, do this, do that, right? That was the beginning, I'd say, of EQ. But at the time, I didn't realize that's what I was doing. But in hindsight, I guess that's when I first started to realize about the importance of being able to get on with people.
Okay, and it's been a long journey since then, and now you've got this sort of, I'll say, slogan ethos around Shiageto, where I've seen it plastered everywhere: IQ, EQ, FQ. Multiply them all together, you get success. So
yeah,
can you briefly walk us through each of those aspects?
I'll take you through the equation, and I should just caveat everyone. I used to be a maths teacher, so of course I've got an equation, right? It's not a real equation. If there's any mathematicians watching this, they'll be like, "That doesn't balance both sides." Don't worry, that's a separate conversation. I'm doing another podcast all about that. But why did I put together an equation, and what is it saying? It's saying this is really sort of getting to the nub of how do you achieve anything in life, right? And you read all these books, you look at all the things, and a lot of this came from the experience I was having working with over 200 companies, right? If whatever you want to achieve, it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's micro, you just want to learn a new skill personally, or macro, you want to build a unicorn business, right? You need to have an idea at the heart of it. You need to have a strategy. That is the IQ part, right? And that's where most people stop. Fantastic. Have a great plan, have a great strategy. Not enough, as you highlighted before, Shab, because I've seen loads of super smart people fall by the wayside, or great ideas, because they haven't been able to communicate it to others, to get other people excited, right? To respond to their criticisms, their emotions around it. That's where the EQ comes in, the emotional intelligence, right? Still not enough. You can have super outgoing, really emotional people, really intelligent people, yeah? But if they're not focused, if they're not really on it, saying, this is what's important, therefore I'm not going to do these things, that's where the focus quotient comes in, then they're not going to achieve. And that's why you need all three. That's why it's a multiply, not a plus, right? You need these components, because any mathematician will tell you anything multiplied by 0 equals 0. So, you can't just go, it's okay, I've got the best idea in the world. Sorry, buddy, it's not going to fly.
My first question for you is, as a leader who's very IQ based, how would you convince this particular person to actually care about the EQ, the FQ? Are there particular examples that you would give? How would you approach that?
Yeah, well, the great thing about IQ people is they like facts, right? They're high on facts. So they can have the best idea in the world. So just show them the facts. You say, great, how's your idea going? Right? How's your how's your objective? If your objective is to climb Everest, and you've got the best plan to climb Everest in the world, but you're still at the base camp, or you're still at the foot of the mountain, how you doing, right? Just show them the fact highlight. We use a technique in our business called bruising egos, right? We call it bruising egos, and it's very simple. It's show them how shit they are, right, at their own goal. So I often have a leader tell me, don't worry, I'm really good at leading my team. I'm really good at communicating. Brilliant. Okay. Or Faris, I'm really good at giving bad feedback to someone. Okay. Well, I'm going to film you doing it, and I'm going to show you it back to you. And I'm going to highlight all the places you're terrible. Right. Or I'm going to use data. The great thing about AI nowadays, take a simple meeting. You can pull all the data of a meeting after a meeting. And I often say to a leader, how much do you think you spoke in that meeting versus somebody else in that meeting? And they'll go, oh, well, there was 10 of us in the room, so I probably only spoke 10% of the time. And then we play the tape back, or we look at the AI data, and it says, do you know what, buddy? You spoke 65% of that meeting. Do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing if you want to be an inclusive leader? And it's when they're presented with facts like that and data, it's very hard to dispute. So if you have a high IQ person, often you've got to bruise their ego.
I was watching a podcast yesterday on Stephen Bollett's podcast, actually, when he talked to the old Netflix CEO, Mark Randolph, and it was a very similar thing. You had to bruise his ego to basically tell him, look, we've got to replace you as CEO here, which is a very hard thing to do, like to tell someone, we need to fix something that you're doing. So how do you approach that with EQ?
So it's one thing delivering a message. You've then got to provide the space for them to deal with the emotions and help them out, right? So it's very similar. What you're talking about is giving hard feedback to somebody, right? And a lot of people, particularly in certain cultures, find it very difficult to deliver a difficult message because they think it means they have to be an asshole, right? Or they have to be this character. I said, no. The thing about delivering a difficult message is when you deliver the message, you have to be super direct. There should be no ambiguity. Then become the friendliest person in the world and give the person space to actually have their emotions around it. Say, how are you feeling about that? I can understand that must be really terrible, right? Or if they don't have trust with you, let them go to someone they have trust with immediately after they've received the feedback. Because that's what happens to a human being. You receive a message, positive or negative, you react. The emotions step in. Unless you're a robot, you can't just then deal with that, whatever the piece of information is, with logic. So great leaders deliver difficult messages and then provide the environment to have the emotional response. So that's balancing the IQ and the EQ.
That's a great quality for a leader to be able to have those difficult conversations. What other qualities would you say is important for founders, and particularly because a lot of our audiences are actually startup founders, are very early on in their career? What qualities are very important for startup founders, and does that differ between the technical founder and the commercial or market inclement founder?
Well, no. At the heart of it, if you want to be a great leader, right? It's a very long list, but let's keep it simple. Let's keep it simple for people, right? So when you said, does it matter if you're a technical or a commercial or a leader? I think the key skill go up a level is knowing your strengths, having self-awareness, and being humble enough to say, I'm not the superhero in every story, right? I need to tag somebody else in, right? So it is that self-awareness, that humility, right? Because some people have the first but not the second, or they have the second but not the first. That sits at the crux of being a really great leader. It's also those same two characteristics that enhance a leader to ask more questions, which is another great skill that I see a commonality between all the greatest leaders I've ever worked with. They tend to ask more than they tell. Right? They're not afraid to step in and tell, but they will usually gather all the opinion in the room before they then give their opinion. Right? They will go into things saying, what don't I know, rather than what do I know? Right? But then when they need to, they can assimilate that information and make the decisions that need to be made. So, at the heart of that is self-awareness, humility, communication, great listening skills. If I found anyone who has those, I know they're destined to be great leaders.
Sure. I mean, Faris, you mentioned that you've interviewed and worked with about 200 companies throughout your time consulting and today with your company. What would you say is a skill that is a bit more available in the business community, especially in startups? Is it IQ, EQ, or FQ? Which one is it just more going around?
In the startup community, the thing startups have in their favor is usually they are founded by super passionate people, right? And a bunch of people who know each other, right? So they usually have a minimum level of EQ or a jumping off point. They don't have a cultural problem like I dislike you. I'm small, I'm nimble, I'm willing to, and my passion will get me through a lot of things, which is often lacking in a big company where people are just there for a paycheck, right? So to play to those, right? But do not let them swamp you. Do not let the friendliness and the fact that you probably you might have started the business with two of your best mates, dilute your IQ, make you lead to bad decisions. Or what we typically see when we work with startups, it really dilutes their focus, right? They've got really good bond. They all buy into stuff, but they want to chase everything. And they don't have the discipline to say, no. So that is my, and I hate to generalize, but that is, that is my sort of experience of working with startups in the last 20 years. And I love it because the difference to the big corporates is when you spot something that's wrong and you tell it to a startup, you tell them on a Monday, by Monday afternoon, they're already wheels in motion to change it. Whereas in a big corporate, you'll highlight it, it'll have to go all the way up the chain, right? And that's the beauty. So you're always in a better place in a startup that you can turn things around a lot quicker.
It's a very high EQ move that you'd have to do, which leads me on to another question which I had around your self-awareness thing that you said.
Yeah.
So me and you off camera, we've been talking about the games that people play and also cognitive biases in people, which are very hard to become self-aware of. How have you actually helped people become more aware of their cognitive biases? Is that something you even think about when you do any of these consulting sessions?
Yeah, 100%, right? To make the maximum impact in the work that we do, and what I love to do is understand the individuals, right? And so by meeting with each person for half an hour, getting into a good discussion, asking the right questions, all it takes is half an hour for somebody to reveal not all of their personality, but a lot of their drivers and resistors, which are linked to their biases. Okay, it's in the way they talk, where they like to focus, the things they like to avoid. Now, they may or may not be aware of those. And you may or may want to bring it visible to them. Okay, and how you do that is going back to can you have a difficult conversation? Do you need to step in? Do you need to be really frank? Or do you need to nudge their behavior? Sometimes it's not about having a super difficult conversation. It's just about changing something around them so that bias can no longer be exhibited. And I can give some examples of that. Biases will impact us all. I mean, I'm aware of probably about 70 biases that are impacting me right now. Right, and if you tell me that you don't think you've got any biases, right, I'll share a link with Shav and Alex afterwards, which is called the Harvard bias test, implicit bias test. You can take any two factors, and it will show you which one you are over biased to. And which one, right? And it's fascinating. Trust me, I've done it many times and discovered stuff about myself that I've been like, oh my god, I never realised I was that. But anyway, going back to your point, yeah. So it is useful, and so in my work, sometimes I nudge people. Sometimes, and I was telling you this, Shav, off camera, I have very forward-thinking companies that will pay me to just sit in a meeting to call out their biases, because they say, look, this is a super important board meeting. Right, we are aware we will do stuff like groupthink, right? We'll confirmation bias. We'll have, me as the boss, I'll have my favorites and I'll over-index to them. I want you to call me out. It's like you can stick up a yellow card at any time. What an amazing, humility and awareness that company has. And imagine if we all did that. There'd probably be someone tapping on your shoulder every 2 seconds. But then you can pick and choose which biases you want to work on.
Can you guys both expand on what the games people play are? Because you mentioned it. Should you get a little bit background on this?
From what I remember, Games People Play is a book about the psychological games that people tend to play without even being aware of them. So, for example, one of them is like, why don't you? But yes. So this is a game where someone will come to someone with a problem and they don't actually want a resolution to the problem. They just want an ability to reject that problem. So I'll approach you with a problem, you'll give me solutions, and I'll find every possible way to reject the solutions that you're offering me. Because what I'm looking for isn't actually solutions to that problem that I came to you for, it's more the ability to reject the problems that the solutions that you're bringing. And people have a lot of these emotions that they go through without even realizing. and that's what I sort of mean by the games that people play. So perhaps please expand on that.
Yeah, I think you gave a really good example there, Shav. A lot of these games, Alex, are from our childhood, right? They serve purpose to entertain us. They're just behaviors that we picked up, and Shav picked up, on one. I just want to engage you in conversation. I don't necessarily want a solution. Or I think back to classic things kids do that make no sense whatsoever. I don't want to play with this toy, but I also don't want you to play with this toy, right? These are games and things that really. And the thing is, we very rarely move away from being the child that we used to be, right? There's the heart of this book that Shav has referenced, the games we play, is the concept that there are 3 states that we operate in. We're either operating as a child, as an adult, or as a parent, right? Now, when you're a child, you'd be very childish. You make unreasonable demands. But there are 2 sides of each of these things. Your child, you can be very demanding, or you could be the goody-goody two-shoes child, right? And you behave in that way when someone opposite you is behaving like an adult. Behaving like a parent, either telling you what to do or telling you off, right? And we often slip back into those and play those games because it's very familiar to our how we operate as a kid, and it provides comfort in a weird way. But the far more healthy way to operate is when 2 adults approach a conversation, right? Anytime you've got this parent-child dynamic, it's lopsided and it's weird, and you see it in businesses. And often that happens between a boss and their employee. The boss takes on the parent. But far more powerful is an adult-to-adult relationship where you push back on each other and say, why are you doing that? And I'll give you a really good example. I'm working with a team that very clearly have a parent-child relationship between the boss and the team, right? And his leadership team. And this is the senior leadership team, right? So his senior leadership team is 8 people. And he was completely unaware. So we sat in the meeting and he did 70% of the talking. All the ideas were his. And when I pointed it out, he said, okay, well, I'll stop doing all these ideas. And I said, well, that's not enough, right? Because you've got into a parent-child relationship. It's not just about you changing to being an adult. Those people are so conditioned to being a child that if you literally changed overnight, they would be just like, what do we do? So they also need coaching to raise their game to be an adult, right? And that's the thing. The sooner you spot, is there a parent-child dynamic, and you get it to an adult, much better results happen all around for the company and for the individuals.
Whilst we're on the topic of EQ, another interesting question I actually wanted to ask you as well is, can you have too much EQ? Because I can also imagine, like, let's say for example, I can use it in a manipulative way where I'm able to manipulate the way that people react to things, or even over focusing on emotional intelligence can also potentially hinder decision-making processes or even strategic focus. Like, is there a limit to how much EQ you should have, or is that just coming down to self-awareness?
Of course, everything in modicum, right? And I love this question, Shav, when you lobbed it at me previously, right? And I get this in lots of different variations. So at the heart of EQ, in what we teach leaders and we work with teams is the ability to flex your style and accommodate other people as much as possible. And I often get people challenge me and say, so if the person sat opposite me is racist, are you saying I should become racist to be really, in touch and get the most out? I said, no, of course not, right? You've got to have the emotional intelligence to draw your own borders and say, I will do, I'm happy to give up, speaking first in the meeting, or I'm happy to send you an email how you like me to write you an email. But if you're asking me to become a racist, then that's a bridge too far, right? So have your own emotional boundaries. And the other thing people say about emotional, can you be too emotional, is if you're taking on everyone else's emotions, that's a lot to deal with, right? You can become super sensitive, right? Again, what emotional intelligence is, there's 2 aspects of emotional intelligence. One is the ability to manage your own emotions. So if ever you find yourself in that situation, have the self-awareness, this is too much for me. Find a way to tap out. And it could mean substituting yourself for somebody else. So of course, do not overload yourself with emotions if that's how. And then the third way that you talked about is, if you are the most, people confuse emotional intelligence with being the most diplomatic and feeling like you have to go around and get everyone's opinion, right? Oh my God, I've got 100 employees in this company. They all need to have an opinion on our strategy. Right? Of course, that's not practical, and that's not emotional intelligence, right? All right. That's where you need to blend it with the IQ. What is the practical way of getting engagement and buy-in from all 100 of those people without necessarily sitting with a blank piece of paper for each of them? And that's where, we often teach leaders about the difference between a open meeting, which is I go into a room with a blank piece of paper and say, all of you, I welcome your opinions, right? To a closed meeting is the other end of the scale, where you walk into a room saying, this is what we're doing. And in between, there's something called a half-open meeting, where you walk into a room saying, I have two ideas. Which one do you prefer? Or I have this idea. I think it's 95% finished. What would you change about it? Right? And that's that half-open meeting. And there's lots of ways to do that, to engage the 100 people without going with a blank piece of paper, which would just be very time-consuming and limiting. Right? And it's super powerful. When human beings engage, even if it's a little bit, they see a little bit of themselves in it. And like, I contributed that change, yeah, they feel more attached to it. Right? So it's a balance of those things. But yeah, it's a great question. Can you ever have too much EQ?
No, yeah. I mean, just from the startup environment that I'm working in, right? I mean, you mentioned this before. IQ is very prevalent. Everyone I'm working around are extremely smart, and they're probably way ahead in their domain. But there's one thing that kind of like is quite interesting to me. IQ and EQ, are they mutually exclusive? As in, someone who's just genetically predispositioned to high IQ, does that mean that no matter how much practice they put in, they're never going to get really high in their EQ just because of their way of thought and what they're comfortable with and the information, the way they process information?
I don't believe so. I believe I believe you can enhance your EQ, right? Exponentially. It's a learned behavior. Okay. Some people are more natural and can progress through that or start from a higher place. And a lot of the challenge is the narrative in your own head. Is like, I can't do that. I don't want to do that. Right. But all these things, particularly, it's like developing any skill. Once you get some momentum and you see the impact it has, you get into it more. And I've worked with many people who are like, oh, I don't want to have to do that. I don't want to have to ask people how their day is. Why should I have to do that? Right? Literally, leaders telling me like, why should I? And you're right. You don't have to, but you're not going to get through to people. You're not going to create that connection that you hope for. Yeah. So so often with those people, it's about, how do I break through that narrative? How do I help them navigate it? Yeah. Maybe I gamify it. I say, look, for the next month, just try it. Right. If you complete a month, I'll buy you a dinner. Right. And after the month, I'm pretty certain that doing it, they'll just either become a habit or they'll actually start enjoying it. Right. And they'll feedback. So I do believe you can acquire EQ. Some people can do it better. And a lot of us just need to break the narrative or have some guidance, because it can be really daunting to pick up these skills if you've never really actively invested in them.
I would also go into add, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that the segmentation of IQ, FQ, EQ, they seem very ambiguous. There's massive overlap between all of them. We were talking about EQ, and then we started talking about these meetings where you can start halfway, and now we're talking a bit more about FQ, getting people more focused, staying on track, essentially. It's something else that we were talking about. It reminded me of another point that we were talking about is about driving a narrative in a startup as well. So how much should we actually leave up to the team in terms of the vision, right? So should the vision be more democratic from the entire team, or should there be like a central dominating figure driving the vision for a startup?
I mean, and we, you and I, we're talking about this, and what we were saying was, it depends on the level of the vision and the level of the importance of the decision, right? If it is fundamental to a company, right? Like, are we going to focus on landing a man on the moon, or are we going to focus on, conquering the Mariana Trench? Then you need to have more people involved, right? Or you need to have some hard discussions, because anyone who's not with that vision, get off the bus, right? But if it's a low-level decision in a company, just have a clear owner. Not everything needs to be consulted on every topic, right? And you and I were talking about the famous example of a company that it spent longer, an energy company that spent longer debating the color they would paint the bike sheds at a nuclear reactor than whether they should have a nuclear reactor or not, right? And you're like, hang on a minute, guys, we're completely misfocusing on what's important here. And often I see this in startups. People will suck in a lot of people around them for a very low-level decision, right? Under the spirit of, I want to be inclusive, or they're indecisive themselves, And that's not a good use of FQ. That's not a good use of the time, right? So pre-deciding at the start what category of importance decisions have in a company is a very vital part, right? And those can change over time. But call it out, define it, say who's the owner, who's leading on it, will make the place a lot better and make the process a lot smoother.
Why do you think that happens? Do you think it's because you're in an environment where there are a bunch of smart people who are ambitious and they want to kind of conquer the world together, so they all grab out the next big thing without having an idea of how they all come together into a centralized narrative? Or is it just it's just really, really hard, and so people just try and feel productive, and it feels productive to spend an hour picking out what the best color is because you feel like now I've nailed the color even though it has nothing to do with the product?
I think it's a combination of the two, right? So from if I, let's take it. Let's say the three of us were working, and you gave me a really difficult question. For my own sanity and to cover my own back, I'd want you two to be involved, right? I'd be like, I value your thinking, blah 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 blah, right? So it's kind of a blanket for me. It's a natural place to go. So part of it is, whereas if you said no, we trust you, do it yourself. Come to us when it's a bit more. That's challenging me, but it's kind of, but then the other side of it comes as well, right? Human beings, particularly smart human beings, like to help, like to be involved, right? There's a classic. I used to do an experiment with some of my bosses. Now I worked in consulting for, top tier consulting, and famously you'd sit in the office till 3 a.m. polishing slides. And one time I was feeling a bit cheeky and I was a bit thin. So I literally showed my boss exactly the same set of slides that I'd shown him before to see if A, he noticed, and B, if he was consistent in the comments that he had given before. And the second time around, he gave a completely different set of comments, right? And later on, I found this piece of research about how human beings like to add on anything you give them, right? They like to feel like they're contributing and see their contribution. Even if you give them a perfect thing that they have previously assessed as perfect, when they next look at it, if there's a period of time between, they'll say, actually, there's something wrong with that. We could improve it. All right. And that's just what smart people like to do. They like to see their value. They like to play. And so it's wary to ask smart people too much, because then be prepared for a bunch of responses back, right? So you've got to pick and choose your battles, so to speak. So A, don't be afraid to take the charge on your own and remove your comfort blanket. And B, be careful about who you ask, because you will definitely get a bunch of responses. And there's nothing worse than trying to incorporate 30 people's responses into one idea. What do they say? A camel was a horse designed by committee. You'll always get that extra bump.
I mean, that's what we were talking about, isn't it? Like driving a vision democratically would probably lead us to the mean, which probably isn't either A or B, but somewhere in between, right? Back to those decisions. Do you have any frameworks to help you decide which decisions require, like, how you said A, B, and C class decisions? How would you actually decide that? It seems easy to say, but like in practice,
yeah,
how would you actually do that?
I could literally send you a process map for any company, any company, whatever they sell, whatever they do, right? And you could categorize, and we could categorize A, B, C. Yeah, so like, property decisions, cleaning decisions, finance. Yeah, literally breaking down every operations of any type of company. And now you'll go through and you'll eliminate the ones for your startup and say, well, actually, we're not a tech company, therefore we don't have a tech team, blah blah blah, right? And that could be a really great way. But the reason I'm sort of tongue in cheek is you need to be a bit more fluid than that, right? If you, as a business owner and the management team of a business, do not know the 3 or 4 critical processes or critical decisions that drive the most value in your business, I would encourage you to step away and spend time looking at, right? And those critical things will change over time. I'm year 5 of bringing my business. In year 1, the critical actions that needed to be done and decisions were around how the hell are we going to sell anything to anyone, right? Don't worry about invoices. Don't worry about hiring. Don't worry about, right? Now we're in year 5 and we have a portfolio of clients. That's not the number one priority. So that stops being a top tier A decision, right? And there'll be, now it's about the brand. How do I build the brand, right? That becomes the A. What are the main things? That's where when we come together as a team, we need to be spending more time on, not, right? So any business owner should be aware of what are those major 2 or 3 things that are critical to their business at that point in time. Those are the things that you need to work out how to make decisions around.
It's the Pareto principle, isn't it?
It's the
The
Pareto.
80-20 rule. It's the same
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
But whilst we're on the topic of FQ, I'd also like to talk about the overlap with IQ there. FQ
Yeah.
and IQ can overlap. And they do in terms of like a startup. Let's say, for example, where we've got a vision, we've got a goal that we want to get to, and we're just ideating. You've mentioned a strategy called Wargaming Pre-Mortem. Do you want to explain a little bit more about what that tactic is, why it's useful, and why startups should think about using it?
Yeah. So I love strategy. I've been working in strategy for 20 years, right? And one of the things is, again, it goes back to overconfidence, goes back to all these sort of biases we have. When I work with teams and they develop a strategy or a person, they'll often sit back and go, right, that is brilliant. All right, that is a great strategy because I designed it myself, is the bit they don't say, or whatever we designed it as a team. But they don't often think, that's a shit strategy. How could it be better? All right. And we encourage people to take that approach. When you finish something, immediately flip it around and go, that is a terrible idea. Let's now tear it apart. And so there's a couple of techniques that we use to help people do that. The reason we do that is A, never be too confident, never believe your own hype, right? But by taking that approach, you can prefix things that are wrong with your strategy. And so the 2 most common techniques that we use, one is called a pre-mortem, where we take any strategy, any idea, any product, and we literally tear it apart. We do a creative session around why is this a terrible idea, find 100 flaws in it, and then fix the 3 biggest ones or the 10 biggest ones. The other way we do it, which is it's similar but is a bit more interactive, is we make a war game out of it. So we'll say, well, let's take your strategy, let's play it out, right? We'll have other people play your competitors. Let's see what they do when they see this amazing strategy, because competitors aren't going to stand still. All right, we'll play the game several times. And what you're going to do is get a playbook. So, when we do this, competitors tend to do this. So our next response should be this. It's like a game of chess. Now, how great if you've already got the playbook already written, you can just play it out, right? Rather than having to make a decision under stress, which is usually going to be a suboptimal decision. It's the old Mike Tyson quote. Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. What's your plan then? Right? You need to have a plan for the first punch, the second punch, the third punch. And that's what wargaming allows you to do. And that's why it's really engaging, really useful for companies. And I very much enjoy doing it with startups, with other companies.
I can imagine it's also a good way to get the team accountable for the ideas that the company is actually doing. But what you were talking about before, buying people into the vision is probably the best way to do that, because people feel like they actually took part in that decision-making process. So yeah, I can see the importance of that.
Yeah, it's a great teaming event. It's great for bringing it to life.
Yeah, maybe it's relevant to the next section, but I wanted to just touch a little bit on personality tests and like how personalities interact with each other within a startup environment. Maybe you're familiar with the Myers-Briggs test, and you have like ENTP, and it kind of tests you in 4 different categories. Do you think there's any practical backing, understanding the different personalities that people have within a team? Because you might understand that this introverted individual, you can communicate with him in this particular style, because you mentioned different communication styles, which I'd like to get into as well. But from your experience, do personality types actually have any bearing on the outcomes when it comes to improving your emotional intelligence within a startup?
Okay. Great question. All right. And have you 2 ever done a personality profile?
Yep.
Can you remember what you were?
I have, yeah. I was an ENTJ.
ENTJ?
I was an ENTP, and I did it, again, 4 times over the years, and it's been very consistent ENTP.
Okay. So what has that meant for your relationship and how you 2 work together? How have you changed?
I think it's judgment versus perception, right? So I think that's like the one difference between Shav and I. I mean, Shav and I have discussed, we've noticed we actually have a lot of overlap in many ways. Would I put the differences down to judgment and perception? I think we looked at it more from the perspective of our skill set, which as engineers, there's a lot of overlap, and we're trying to see where we can differentiate each other.
It sounds like you're trying to retrofit things based on what this, the test. You're like, that was probably explained by the difference between the P and the J. Now, I'm going to give a classic politician consultant. They're good and bad, right? I use a lot of them, and I'm trained in a variety: Myers-Briggs, DISC, Lumina, you name it. Nowadays there are hundreds of these things. They're just popping up left, right, and center. They are great to give people an understanding of their differences and their similarities. They are not great when people overfixate on them, right? And start categorizing things. Oh, you did that because you're like that. Or, oh, I can only, I get on better with you than I do with you, right? And I'll tell you, I once worked at a company where it went to the extreme. The CEO loved profiling. He used this one called DISC, which gives you a color, you're red, blue, green, right? He loved it so much, he got everyone in the company to do it. He loved it even more. He then insisted, he bought them all a t-shirt, and he insisted they had to wear their t-shirt of their color when they're in the office. Right? He thought this was being really helpful. He thought it's like, oh, I know Shavs are red, so when I walk up to him, I know to talk to him in the red language. What actually happened, when you walked into the canteen at lunch, reds were sitting together, yellows were sitting together, blues. It actually created tribes and divisions. So yes, it's great to have a bit of understanding where you're different, but when it becomes labels and therefore prejudgments, it's dangerous territory, right? So I use them sparingly. And I often say to clients, do you know what? I'm going to save you thousands of pounds. We don't need to do a Myers-Briggs, right? I'm going to do a simple exercise. I'm going to get everyone on their feet, right? All of you on your feet. I'm going to read out 10 statements. If you're option A, go to the left of the room. If you're option B, go to the right of the room, right? And I'll shout out things like, I'm a morning person, I'm an evening person. I said, it doesn't really matter, just which one do you feel you are? I'm not going to check your alarm clock. And the whole point being is that you will find no one who runs to the side of the room in the 10 questions exactly the same as you. So you need to be accommodating for the people. Now, you might find people who run 8 times the same as you, and you'll probably get on with them better. But how does it feel? Because occasionally you'll get one person stood at the side of the room and everyone else on the other. How does it feel being that one person? Put yourself in those shoes, try and reach across and help them over to your side. Right? Which is what personality profiling should be about. Be aware of the differences and how can you stretch a hand across to get them over without just going, well, you're on that side, I'm on this side, tough luck, loser.
Well, inherently with personalities, some people, based on your personality, it might not be mapped to your actual like Myers-Briggs personalities, but some people respond better to different communication styles. And that is related to their personalities at the end of the day.
Of course, right? And some of them are really nifty nowadays, right? There's one where, and actually some of the AI out there nowadays will predefine people and remind you as you're about to go and meet them. Now, you're about to meet Alex today. Here's his personality type. This is how you should operate, right? Whether I do anything with that is different. And that's fantastic, right? Giving you little nudges. But as with all things, it might go wrong, or Alex might be in a bad mood, because nobody stays in a personality type ad infinitum.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You talked about communication. One of the things we work with leaders on is flexing across the 4 different communication styles. And we said that, unfortunately for you, human beings are complex. No one person stays in one style. So if I'm a logical person, normally 90% of the time, I like you to talk to me with logic, right? Give me arguments, give me facts, data. But you know what? If I'm in a burning building with you, I don't need you to list all the facts of why I need to leave, right? I don't need you to say, oh, the building's on fire. The temperature is now 148 degrees Celsius. I just need you to say, get the hell out. Let's save ourselves, right? A very direct communication style.
What are the 4 communication styles?
The 4 communication styles are, style 1 is logic. Style 2 is directive. I just tell you what to do. Style 3 is about bridging, right? It's all about our relationship. How do you feel about that? I ask you lots of questions, get your opinion. Style 4 is visionary, right? It's tell a story, create a visionary impression. Now, I was taught very early on by a boss who I hated at the time, but to practice all 4 of those skills. And what I mean by that is we would be preparing a presentation for a meeting the next day or later in the week. And he said, Faris, you do not know what style the people in the room are going to need from you. So therefore, you are going to prepare all 4 types, 4 different presentations. So it's 4 times the amount of work. My God, I hated him, right? 4 times the amount of work. But because he made me do those reps, I can now do it effortlessly, right? And this is what we teach leaders. You need to be able to walk into a room, try style A. If it doesn't work, just switch to style B, without people realizing, then style C, and that's how you win the room. That's how you get on with every personality type. Yeah. And people feel, warm and fuzzy because you're talking to them how they like to be talked to.
I read your blog post about these communication styles, actually. One
Yeah.
about where you met royalty and how you noticed that they were switching these communication styles as they were
Yeah.
talking to people, right? And the first thing that made me think of is, are there any risks associated with switching your styles like this? Because the first thing I thought was that seems pretty ingenuine. Is that something that you could cause by flexing your style? Could it cause confusion in your communication? Is that a risk?
Well, I mean, if there's a risk to you, if you're hopping around all the time and you lose sense of who you are, it depends how wedded you are to thing. It can be confusing to those around you if they see you in a different light. I don't know about you, but think about when you were a kid and you're probably different now. You're an adult, and some of your friends who knew you back then, if they see you now, or if your family see you in a professional context. I remember my sister came to see one of my talks, and she was like, "Oh my God, I never knew you did this sort of stuff. I never knew you talked so confidently." Because she's only ever known me around the dinner table, and only ever, So it can be confusing in that sense. But ultimately, I don't think it's, I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's a bit like, playing lots of different sports. Is it bad that you play football and also play golf and don't mind playing a game of tennis? Now, the thing is about a style is you will still use one of the styles 80% of the time. And that's the one you'll become famous for. All we're saying is that you have the other tools in your bag in case you ever need them.
There's also something else. It's a bit from earlier on that you were talking about when we were talking about the Wargaming Pre-Mortems. Something that me and Alex have actually hypothesized ourselves is that IQ is actually the one pillar of your equation that seems to be becoming more commoditized as sort of like these AI intelligent models become more prevalent, right? We can usually go to ChatGPT and do a lot of the brainstorming, which abstracts a lot of the IQ element away. Where does this leave the role of EQ and IQ? Like, should we now focus a bit more on EQ now that IQ is less, we need to do it less ourselves? And how does this impact startup environments as well?
Yeah. I think, you've hit the nail on the head, right? AI is helping with IQ massively, right? We should maybe call it AIQ. There you go. I'll patent that after this call. But what I use it myself as a thought leadership, get my first draft of ideas out, and I use it with teams, right? I say, we're doing a creative session today. I'll say, Shav, instead of your ideas today, you're the person going to be running ChatGPT. You're going to generate more ideas that way. But as you will always see in the disclaimer at the bottom of AI, you need to sense check the results it's giving you because it might hallucinate, right? And that's where IQ changes from actually doing the grunt work around IQ to being enough to know this isn't right, or I need a second opinion, right? It's like being a journalist. They teach you in journalism school, never trust one source, right? Right? One source could be misinformed. You always need to validate. And in fact, in establishments like the BBC, you need at least 3 sources to validate the same story. So it's having that IQ to say the critical thinking rather than the technical expertise. Like, is this right? Does this smell right? Does this feel right? Where can I get a second opinion? Where can I challenge this idea? I think that's where IQ shifts over time as we get more AI. Now, EQ, right? AI can only lead you to the door and come up with a good idea. You're still going to have to engage other people, right? You're still going to have to sell the idea. You're going to have to deliver the difficult message, right? And I worry that in the future, if we outsource too much to AI, and this we'll lose that skill to have conversations, to build relationships. I see it in my nephews who are afraid of picking up the phone. I see it, in having real conversations. I see it when I go to startup events, very technical people who tell me that the reason they built their whatever solution was to avoid a conversation. Literally, I was having this chat with someone the other day whose dream, he'd built an app to manage all his relationships so that he didn't actually have to speak to any of the people who were in his relationships. And I'm like, well, then that's not a relationship. That's just an app sending them flowers and cards once a year. So yeah, I think EQ will become more prevalent, but let's not forget you still need that critical thinking around IQ.
Okay, so practically for these, let's say these leaders which you're communicating with, consulting with, how do you actually advise them to leverage AI?
I say, first of all, have you tried it? If not, give it a go, right? And this is classic, right? Is for a lot of leaders, they love the sound of AI, but they've never actually interacted with it. And I'm talking particularly in bigger corporates, because the EQ comes in. The EQ around, I'm nervous about it. It's too much effort. I don't know where to start. So it's a bit like helping somebody get to the gym for the first time. I encourage them in small steps sometimes. And like I said, sometimes I'll force them to use it as part of a meeting and show them it's not so scary. And it's amazing, just by doing that. So the step one is, have you used it? Let's get you starting to use it. Right. And as with everything, I don't expect you to become an expert, right? I don't expect you to suddenly know how to fix the insides of your car, but I do expect you to know how to change the oil or know when you need to take it for a service. So that's what I'd encourage all leaders. Start using it. Don't be afraid. Get some help to overcome those emotional challenges, right? And learn just enough to make yourself, useful in a conversation. And then probably find someone or upskill someone in your team who does love it, who is your go-to person then, and you can have an honest conversation with them.
I think one thing you touched on that was quite interesting was the importance of ownership in your work, right? And like a trend that we're seeing now with AI is, we know that AI can actually be the best chess player in the world. It's been the best chess player in the world since 1999. But no one watches it. No one watches AI versus AI. And now that we have the same patterns with art, no one likes really AI generated art. It's important to have ownership behind it from a human. And I think the same thing applies to communication today, as well as, on my end, I use AI quite a lot to help create code. But when the code is fully AI generated, I don't care about it as much. I don't treat it as well as I would. And I think the same could actually apply to communication. If your communication is being outsourced to AI, the relationships won't matter as much to you at all. And there's something like quite fundamental there to the importance of a relationship for you to, build a company together, for example. And so it's one of those things where, like, if I had to make a prediction, EQ to me seems like you would never outsource it because it's so fundamental to human nature. And then communication as well as a part of that.
I would 100% agree, right? The moment we do, it's a different world we live in. We move towards more the Matrix or something. EQ, and let's not fool ourselves. This is what you just described as something that's been happening for generations, right? Even before AI. I think about my world in professional services. The partner goes and does all the client management, goes and presents all the funky slides and all the thing. Who did all the work? It was the analyst, right? So the modern equivalent is AI is doing all the work. You still need to present the facts and build the relationships and sell it. And, so don't forget about that skill. And I know when you're a founder and you've got lots of things on your plate, it's an easy thing to skip. Right? Oh, I'll just ping them the email of the results from the AI or whatever, or the model. Actually, it's far better just pick up the phone, talk them through it. That'll be far more valuable, even if it takes twice the time.
On the topic of founders, do you have any tips for the key qualities or traits that you see in successful co-founding relationships?
In co-founding relationships, I mean, it's a bit like any relationship, right? You pick your co-founders like you pick your love relationship partner. I think, look, co-founders, going back to our personality discussion, are going to invariably have different personalities. So it's not about put an introvert with an extrovert, put a technical with a commercial, which is a proxy. I think you can literally put any two people together. Some will be harder combinations. It's about the mechanisms you have for handling disagreements and reaching decisions, right? And do not be afraid to spend time discussing that at the start, as weird as it is, right? One thing we do with leadership teams, even when they've been flying for a while, is say, have you agreed to ways of working? Have you written it down? And they'll be like, we're 2 years in, why do we need to write down how we work together? Because like anything, it's like something will go wrong at some point. It is useful to have thought through how you will handle that. And I'm not talking about a separation. I'm just talking about those. What you want is, if you disagree on a point of view, you don't want to derail the business for 2 weeks. You want it to derail the business for 2 days or 2 hours. And that helps. That happens when you've pre-made it, say, when this happens, this is how we or here are the things we'll make sure to eliminate those kind of things. And it's simple things sometimes, like when you work with teams, hey guys, can we just stop sending emails after 10 p.m.? Right? Make those small agreements and those little things that cause friction. So yeah, we can talk about the personalities, should the commercial go with the technical, but actually far more powerful is how do you accelerate that, showing what you like and how you'll deal with things when they go wrong.
So like how with my girlfriend, we've sort of predefined what she would like me to do when she's upset. So I tend to approach with logical solutions to our problems, but
yes, sir.
That's not what she wants. She just wants me to be there and tell her things are okay.
It's a classic one, yeah.
Tell her to calm down. That usually helps.
Yeah, tell her it's not that bad. Yeah. I've got three guys making sexist mansplaining jokes. I love it. This podcast is definitely going to go far.
But yeah, thanks for that. In terms of like the actual leadership skills, though, what metrics do you actually use to measure how successful a leader is?
Look, ultimately, success is linked to what is your goal, right? For us, we don't come in and apply new metrics and say, look, on this scale, you've improved by 27%, because it'd be disingenuous if the client goes, yeah, but we haven't sold anymore, or yeah, but the team. So we just say, when we go in, we say, what are your metrics? That'll be our proof point. That will move those, right? Your leadership, better leadership should lead to those improving. If not, why the hell are we improving your leadership, right? Just for a glamour project. Now that's how we do it. Others will have, metrics and show, I can show that you listen twice as much on a call and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, those for me are all inputs. But ultimately, if we're not moving the dial on your key vision, then I'm not being an effective consultant.
It's just the best way to reach your final goal, is what I'm hearing. But from your standpoint, like, what do you envision your legacy being? Why are you doing this? What is your goal?
I'm not arrogant enough to have a legacy. Look, I think we alluded to it, but we didn't say before. I actually had a previous career as a school teacher, all right? And that was 20 plus years ago, right? I used to teach secondary school maths and economics. So kids, GCSEs, A-levels, blah, blah, blah. And the best moments for me when I did that was the aha moments when you helped a kid who previously told you they hated maths or they could never get it, they'd never get it, right? And when you ask me about legacy, the beautiful thing now, 20 years later, those kids start looking me up on LinkedIn. They start sending me connection requests. They are now partners in law firms. They are now senior analysts in things. And they send you a nice connection request saying, I just wanted to track you down and say thank you. All right. Or I remember your lessons and they really helped. They were so much fun. Do you know what? Fast forward 20 years, if a couple of clients do that for me, that's enough of a legacy, right? Just change the impact for one person. It will have ripples. All right. And that's why I do what I do.
And finally, Faris, thank you very much. How do we reach out to you? And what kind of work do you offer?
Well, you send checks to, Look, the kind of work that we offer is stuff I've alluded here. We work with leaders, we work with teams, get them working better together around IQ, EQ, FQ. That's through facilitation, training. But you want to discover more, come and check out our website, Shiageto.com. We'll put the spelling of that because I know it might be. But the other place is come follow me, find me on LinkedIn. I am disproportionately there, as in I post every day. I shared little tips, blogs, and I respond to every message and carry on the conversation. So love to chat to anyone who's enjoyed this. And if you've not enjoyed it, well, screw you. I'd still love to chat to you, right? That's how much EQ I have. But no, it's been a real pleasure. And thanks for the invite.